당은 지시쇼게 당어서 셈 세디 간데세 세디 셈 세디 당은 넘주 다 띵한서 기부도 기원민도 세디 다 제제 셈 세디 간에 중어 중거리 세디 다 그런 안에 셈 세디 수다 숙제 많이 봐 나 그런 수요 말해서 카도다 수다 입라서 매 말해서 나 토바데 레바요 말해서 나 그런 유지 낭제 유지 낭 투구여바 낭구여바 낭 투바지 되네기 낭미기 나네 될야 릭잠기 뭐지리야 네 셰바라 거래서 지금 저 셰바세데 되는실에 거래서 지금 도스지는 거죠 나 되네기 셰바데 로리야 낭두거는 쓰는 거래서네 간라야 맞죠 바랑고 뭐니 두바는 거래서 당아서 우비니 술라다 간스리라나 나와나시 요르베스레도 제바치도 갑라 우비니 술라 신실라 그 계징아마다 치마다 신라 뛰니 할려 샤바스니 줍디와 마도 나와나시 지그랑 뭐니 두바지 간라야 맞죠 바랑 뭐니 두바지 요 말에서 어다딩은 수디 쇼게 디고 셔러다
Good afternoon. This morning, then, we looked at the mind, for example, a happy mind or an unhappy mind. Looking at, firstly, mind itself, its entity, we see that it is not form, it's nothing tangible, it has no color or shape. Rather, its entity is that objects can appear to it, and those objects are known. That merely is the entity of consciousness. But how it appears to mind, how mind itself appears to mind, is as if it is independent. It appears to exist in the same way as every other phenomenon that appears to mind, every other object of thought, in that it appears as if it is not dependent on anything at all, but exists by way of its own essence. And when we investigate, though, we come to realize that in reality, consciousness is not independent. That is not how it exists. Rather, it is dependent on causes, parts, and imputation by mind.
저게 야가딩 저게 디 중요하게 디기 용하게 셈딩 저게 야게다야 뭐 컴페트다야다 동아다 강아 용하게 셈디기 파다 매바수지 안에 두시는 저게 다 디기 주야데 동아세야데 디기 주야데 디시고로와
The happiness we long for and the suffering we are so keen to avoid, that the experience of that primarily depends on mind itself. So therefore it's important that we come to know and understand our inner workings, understand mind well. Because through understanding mind well, recognizing the causes that influence mind in a particular direction over another, we can recognize the causes that lead to the arisal and strengthening of virtuous minds, because they lead to happiness, and the avoidance and eradication of non-virtuous minds, which lead to suffering.
And in inza danga jugi sim yaga na dua sedi sim dua sedi sim digi jesu rang ne en mong ba de bo di rang la ma ji ba da shan la ma rang shen ni ga la gang ga yong ya gi ane sim ji yin ba na ane je bo di ni shung gu ba na sim ding a dua ra sha yu ro ba da sim yaga sedi danga zu ni rang shen ni ga la sim digi jesu 소소레 디기 용야다 샹레야 디기 용 주투에게 셈들랑 아주 셈 상보레 사직 네 디시 는 저기 변나 천시를 배로 샤유도 콘로세 삼는데 아니 디 콘로스 개베네 당아 저기 하고에 길레라셔디로 와당 콘로 개베네 소소레 마기보서야다 소소 강아테야 아니 미션달래야 마기보서야다 미션달라 강아테요 바자 제상 콘로세기 셈들라 때네 라시니가를 동아기고레스 제보디 동아지 강아신 거 제가 디네사디 콘로디 딩한서 먹어야 되려야지로다 셈 상보세데 셴레 팬비 삼도 나와네 디셈디다 상보레스 그래서 잠는 팬비 삼도 나와네 디기 제보들라 ane sosu le digi shen le pemba drupje shen le digi ra shen niga le digi ligu yo ba za ma zo semba sangbo le sa ji ji za nga zo go he de da ti go go de de ne za nga zo semba sangbo de ya ge dang gu le sa ji ji za nga zo du chen de sung go lo.
Recognizing the pivotal role mind plays in the attainment of happiness and avoidance of unhappiness, we can see then the importance of coming to know our inner workings, be able to differentiate between wholesome and unwholesome minds. Because in order to experience happiness ourselves and to bring happiness into the lives of others, we need to understand our own inner workings, and likewise to avoid problems and difficulties in our own life and to not contribute to the difficulties others are experiencing. We need to take control, take responsibility for our own mind. Our own mental process largely happens without active participation or being aware. This we can change. So for example, if we think of the consciousness of anger, we can easily recognize that the arisal and abiding of anger makes us unhappy, destroys any mental peace. And when we express it in any way to others, it brings harm to them too. So clearly we can recognize that a mind such as anger is in the class of unwholesome and unwanted. On the other hand, a way of thinking that is gentle, kind-hearted and tender, when that it dominates us, our mind is calm and peaceful, and our heart is open towards others, and our interaction with others benefits them. So from the arisal of such a mind, we see the benefit that comes to ourselves and to others.
Dine inza tanga zugi sem kongro seyadi, jizanda sem kongro seyadi ganis kigo re ko gyudan ki meba chila yungu ma jizan ganis yungudu sibe da ganis yungudu sibe shimju cheyadu da nga du shimju cheyadu kabla ane nga zu kongro ki ba ne bene nga zugi jala chiglia mi shanda chi nga zu jala ya ho cheyo ba ne mi shanda chi di nga zu chola tang ba ne lamsang nga zu ane chi ngi jala chola tang so se lamsang kongro lango ro ba jizan di kongro laya di tangpo nga zu kongro laya di samlo di da ganis tangpo ki gyu garala dini kikido sempe samtang yodo kabla ngi jala di chola tang so se chi tangpo ngi jala di chola tang du sin di samlo ki di jela ya kolo kongro kigo ro da jizan ngi jala chola tang sha se di tangpo di hawa samlo di ki di jela kyo dukja le sin de pasho tele kongro lango ro jizada ngi jala di chola tang du sipe samlo di ki di ganis yungu du labne nga se di nga sebe samlo dile nga sa samlo du har korne jeda nga sebe samlo dele tene ngi jala tene gyön shur tang sha tene kongro la jizan kongro di ki di ngi jala chola tang sha sebe samlo dile tene yo di gada dili wasne nga sebe samlo dile do jizan nga zo nga sebe samlo shile tene ngi jala ngi punja ngi chi ngi tele nyugudu ngi punja le nyugudu nga la ya ho chi du shine an du shine nga zo kongro ki go ra se jizan nga zo zai ge dang bo sam ki zu ju za wa di nga sebe nga jin de li go re je jizan nga zo nga jin de le de nga de lo le nang du ga ne nang du se sam da du ga lai ma do rang wen de zu bai nang go re je da na wa na xin wi ni su le da ra re be se sim ju je ya du jizan di nga de de ne ji yo ma re sa da ga ne yo re se ne xian la due xian pa chai pung bo da an ji ge yang la da de ne ge xian la due ne pa le da ba zeng ma do min du se wi ni su le de ne du jizan nga se de na wa na xin chi min du jizan me wa za da nga se be sam lo de la ne ngi ja la se de du se ne nga gi nga se be sam korong wi ni su di ji ma chi ji da ha go yong du ngi se be da nga ra xin du ba sam lo de chung du go lo di ju ma ngi ja la nga le ne sha se ngi nga le ne du pa kong sa de pa ga tu go re ka ya de zai wi gi du se ne li go re se de nga zo da ka sang ge yin ne di ring ne xia de cha sang da dan da ning bo de di ro da.
Recognizing that anger is unwanted, we ask ourselves, how does it come about? Does it just happen? Is it causeless? Or does it arise in dependence on causes? So call to mind an illustration of when anger or any of its class, such as frustration or annoyance, has arisen, and think of a situation, perhaps when someone was utilizing or making use of a valued possession of yours, and they broke it. Immediately, anger arises. And why did anger arise then? Because they broke something that you value, broke one of your possessions. And because of that, anger arose, and most probably once responded to their thoughtless behavior with speech that was harsher than you would otherwise prefer. So this is quite easy to see. But where else, what other causes were there for the arisal of anger? Well, it's that one's possession was broken. And why is that seen as my possession? Well, we can only relate to that object as mine in dependence on believing in a self-existent self. So from this view of self-grasping, that the self exists truly, comes the thought mine, that grasps at things as being mine. And then when something that is mine and valued is broken, then the affliction of anger comes, because what has happened is not in accordance with my views, my wants, my desires. Or if it's a possession that belongs to a loved one, likewise anger will still arise, even though it's not my possession, but it's the possession of my loved one. So at the root of this chain of causes that results in anger and an expression of anger, the very root is the apprehension of a self as existing in a way that it does not. So how is it that the self appears? It appears as if it is something independent, something that doesn't require anything at all to exist. It appears as if it's not dependent on other consciousnesses, nor on consciousness. This is not dependent on imputation. It appears as if it doesn't require parts or causes at all. It appears independent. But as we've been looking at, when one investigates to see if the self exists in the way that it appears, we cannot find any such self-existent self. Rather, we come to see that the self is dependent. Despite appearing as being independent, it is empty of existing independently. Rather, it is dependent on causes, parts, and imputation. And as we reflect on this ever more, and this does require repeated reflection over a sustained period, because it's through repeatedly analyzing in this way that one comes to see again and again that the self cannot be found to exist in the way that it appears. And I've looked many times and I keep not being able to find it, and therefore cannot exist in this way. And this certainty that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears, and that it exists merely as an imputation by mind onto the aggregates, as that mind of wisdom grows, the ignorance of self-grasping weakens, and thereby resulting afflictions weaken in strength and weaken in frequency. So this, in brief, is the purpose of this entire topic, is to come to radically transform how we view the world, and to transform our relationships with what appears to us and reality itself.
난저기 레로 하고에 지라 아주게 디로아 집네 아주려 코로 숙침보시 라요도 지금 동게 코코로 동그런 넘규그런 뱃코런 지금 수부이 넘버로 있다 안지기 리거와 동 넘규코로다 아니 지금 미션다 따요되네 또 마가와 초월을 마대에게 동게 넘규디 된거 제가 코로 숙침벌에도 동게 넘규디 퇴요되네 미션달이야 초와 동안께 지금 당한도 코로나에 말아봐지 아니 지금 배 지금 잠재 삼나 숙침을 마다봐지 되네 뒤비갑다 먼저 지난에 동게 넘기듯 지단으로 차고라 야 지금 소설의 세미나를 잠재 삼단 파기 파절이야 가위 삼바 휴지 휴첨보로 예대갑래 야 동게 넘겨지는 파 지카가 차지 아니 동디 산다가 통용되네 파절이야 뜻 가라나 용거지 동디 세우도 와다가 수부 넘겨지기 지단 수부 넘겨지기 파절이야 가라나 야저 소와 대화 제 뒤에 넘겨지기도 딘 수부 넘겨지 간실리기도 랍도 디 나올라 삼나도 삼나 나올라야 파샤나 제와다 잠비 삼로직 뒤에디갑라 수부 넘겨지기 넘겨지 샬야 대랑라 제게 초와제게 넘겨지 레도도와 다 수부 넘겨지 소설이야 콩로다 버샬나 마게외 삼바 샬야 체외 삼바로 숙침버지 기여도갑라 디 류게 넘겨지야 안파 통에 되어도 현다의 통에도 가 초와리야 지금 마디시시 마기버로 제디 데네지게 레디가지 수부 넘겨들라 데네 지금도 제가 당 안쪽에 콩로야 말랑 가위게 잠지게 삼려 숙침매듯이 곧 땅님 찬념을 할 수도 있겠블 동게 넘겨야 직네 통원되네 아직 배 가라나 맞게바체 배 직양 초 맞기봐야 맞기봐 넘균 초와 돼야 땅님을 기하는 넘겨들리도 딩아서 다 세부로 차도 하고 두도 돼
If you think of how we feel when anger, especially strong anger, arises within us, or what we observe when someone before us becomes angry, we know that one's facial expression changes. And others can readily observe when oneself is angry, just like we can observe it in others too. And when we see someone whose facial expression is showing anger, that immediately makes us apprehensive and uptight inside. We may have no reason to think that they're angry at us, but merely seeing an angry person before us tightens our heart. Similarly, we know that when we ourselves or we encounter someone whose face is just a normal, relaxed expression, that has quite a different impact. Likewise, when we ourselves or encounter someone who has an expression of loving kindness, we know what a very different impact that has. So whilst we are usually in a more balanced state, when there are times when one is feeling a lot of love inside or a lot of anger, this is expressed, shared with others, even without any reliance on our verbally expressing it. And thereby, we have our mental state has an impact on others, and the mental state of others has an impact on us.
제주 차상 안쪽에 삼로디지 레디에 차상 데니기슈도 nga 세비 삼로들이야 제위다 데니시고레스 안도 디지쇼게 두시에바레 니나신 아주 쇼게 시디 가르선에다 nga 세야다 nga 풍보 세야다 nga 셈디게 우인이 수디 하고도 우인이 수디 가르선에 권 현실에 뛰네 현실에 뛰네 주바치레스 제 현실에 뛰네 주바 제 현실에 뛰네 주바다 하고도 현라마도 랑문의 주바 자와기니 민두선배 삼들이기레제 딜레도 안 저기 안에 자주 셈 게알이야 안 지다 안 핑계 레세지셔와 안디 나신 당 저기 뭐 다딩 안 줄라 삼다도 두르와 다디파 현파 삼다제 제자다 현디게 가르 동화 간슬리고라세데 현디게 동화레디에 콘로게다 뉴마제 지자 나세베 삼도 콘줄레 나서 삼다와나 콘줄레 나세베 삼도 되네 딜리고 제자 나세베 무인니 수다 하모고 있긴제네 되네 nga rangshin drupa zibe samlo shukchimbo kye, rangchizin samlo shukchimbo kye, dela dine kontrada nyomo khonzo dunga dine yungduwa sambiketa, khonzo dunga yongtang diye gyudike dine yongtang rinpa di nganzo sebu ha guguru wada nganzo ki chige dine ki deshi nganzo cheba che dine nguyi nesu ha godu, shanda dikile dunga yongtang ki gyu rinpa di yongtang di nganzo lo yongtang da jigbara wadu si ha guguru wada. 제사다 소소라나 되지 조용하죠. 다음에 바토베 따와도 공부이나 랑제진 삼로도 덴바주 덴진이 파 매바서 되라 콘로게 되네 되샤 마기와 차이 되네 강아데 세 투구도 셈베게 삼로 디나시가 현다 삼담바네 현다의 코로나주 결론아 라시제진 삼바데 매바서 바이나 텔레티노 콘라다 안에 녀모 마게 된 데데 레사 마사 데당 원게 둥아 마뇨 용구여바데 다 세바하고 거러봐다 데네 인자 콘솔이야 데네 인자디 세에게 탑람 여바디 소소한 게 하고 거러봐다 하고 봐인자 다 콘솔 동안 세야단 디유 주비에게 탑람 여바다 하고 연도 데네 콘솔이야 니지게다 잠제디 삼 하바도 슈치무기 두고래 제래 제가 어다디 콘솔 탑람도 닝제 다디 데네 그 콘솔 강아 데네 체도와 제산 디메바 쇠바네 콘솔 동안 세 두고도와 디 줍주바나 콘솔 디기 줍투고도와 디인자 콘솔레 동아세야나 디기 줍여 등이 제기 인생비가 삼로디 슈치엘레 두고 그래서 가르스네 완전 디기 줍여다 동아세계 탑람 딩한 주기 네타다 하고 거로와 제가 하고 봐 있나 콘솔로 로바제 둠대요 와 제가 제네 로바제나 판도 줍투기요 받아 하고 해도 잠니제 대야 안 슈치에다 둠버 슈치에다 예야 안 야게도에 누버체요 레제레
The illustration about facial expressions is something we all have experience of. And I use it because we know this from our own experience, that this is how we ourselves display our emotions, as do other people. So we know that this works on both ourselves and others. Now let's refer back again to what we've been looking at thus far in the teachings. That all phenomena appear to us as being independent, whether it's the person, an aggregate such as the body, or consciousness, mental aggregates. All of them appear as being independent, but when we search, we find they are not independent but dependent. And in this way we come to understand reality better, that every object of thought we have appears in a way that it does not exist. And we are engaging or grasping at it in a way that it does not exist. And therefore, all our other afflictions arise and we suffer. As we come to gain ever more familiarity with this meditation, and it starts to have more of an impact on us, as it becomes no longer an intellectual understanding, but more of an experiential understanding, our way of thinking starts to transform, and we don't cling to appearances so strongly. We start to understand that the full process of appearance, from what appears to consciousness to the view of the eye at its basis, all of these are empty of true existence. And as our ignorance of self-grasping weakens, our self-cherishing weakens. So these two together, as the ignorance weakens, we cherish ourselves, our own wishes, that much less. And thereby, our afflictions don't ripen so readily and are not so powerful. We start to gain ever more transformative experience of these teachings. And we interact with others and our thoughts in a very different way. And our mind stays calmer and more peaceful. And where this is of such great importance, is not just for our own happiness, but how we interact with others. Especially those who've known us for a long time, because this transformation takes repeated reflection over a sustained period. Those who know us over a sustained period, a long time, will be aware of this transformation. They will trust in this transformation, that it's not just an act we're putting on, but they will know that we are not the same as we used to be. They will see this change within us, and that will make them receptive to us, because we will be showing a peace of mind that all beings long for. And moreover, from our side, as we go through this period of transformation, we are going through it because we are understanding reality ever better. We are understanding the reality of how the self exists, consciousness exists, the body exists. In other words, every object of thought, we are understanding ever clearer how it exists in reality. And therefore, we can readily recognize when those around us are interacting with their appearances as if they exist in the way that they appear. And we'll see others becoming angry about an appearance that is not in accordance with reality. We'll notice people becoming desirous about something that too does not exist in the way that it appears. And we'll know that not because of the theory we've heard in teachings, but that we've taken these teachings and reflected on them and had transformation within ourselves. And knowing that we and others are really no different, we'll understand the causes of their suffering and the suffering that they are going through. And we'll understand that independence on our own inner journey, our own spiritual transformation. So in this way, because of our own inner transformation, powerful compassion will arise for the suffering of others, because we will understand why they are suffering, and that, on one hand, they are helpless in the situation because they are overwhelmed by their afflictions, particularly their ignorance. But on the other, there is a solution. Through being skillfully guided and developing themselves spiritually like we are doing ourselves, they too can experience peace of mind. So in this way, through our own spiritual development, our mind becomes more peaceful. We have greater love and compassion for others, understanding why they are suffering. And they, from their side, are not harmed by us, and they are inspired by us and receptive to our guidance. So all these benefits come from taking these teachings and meditating on them repeatedly over a sustained period.
rangi ane sanje gopang tobar che janshu sem kewa la nyingto lakbar di ya da shen yi sem je dunga se den digi tubli ya nyingto lakbar di nyingto chenpo da boba ke ya di yung ko le shi ruwa kar sene ko ne su di ko tablam druptang di ha go go ro ha go ba na tablam druptang da ha go den tuben drup tu gi ba da ha go yu den nyingto ble ya da ane boba le ya da ane shen ki ni chi kang ha ma che ba di do shi yung ko le se.
Meditating on reality through the techniques of dependent arising, coming to realize the emptiness of that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, but exist merely as dependent arisings. Through this process, as I've just mentioned, our love and compassion for others grow. We don't feel so isolated and alone, but we realize the deep level of interconnection with others. We understand their suffering. We understand why they're suffering. And we know from our own experience that freedom from suffering is possible for ourselves and all beings. And this understanding of reality leads to love and compassion for others arising from deep within one's heart, and a great strength of mind, a determination to pursue without interruption, without distraction, our spiritual development, so that we can be of ever more benefit to others. And this comes about through knowing that what we have learned intellectually, it really works. It comes about through transforming intellectual knowledge into experience. And that leads to the arisal of love and compassion from deep within, an incredible strength of mind and determination to transform ourselves for the sake of others.
And Zugipena, Anzulia, Chiki, Mami Tikilia, Yanumdu Nalma, Chomiagi, Jangdor Che, Gurwa, Jangdor Che, Got Jangdor Che, Chomnet in the Chomguri, and Tablam Dine, your money, Salaya, Babti Dine, Babwas, Lobjon, Jangdor Che, Lobjon, Yudi and Jurwada. Nanzu Lobjon Meding, the Nigget on the Lobjon Meding, Miss Yorwa, that the nigger and the change, Mini, the Namdugalia, Tobogalama change, that Namduma, Chomgu, Labna, Nanzu Lobjon, the nigger, Canis 첨다당 간대시기다 지게 하모거나 배시기로 와다가 샤다 띵하지만시 첨미알바 시나 시우제다 계수 첨배나 마사시에와 시엘마도 타야하고 와 진짜 배시기고라 배시나 직시고라 대 계수 첨보나 시줘야지 다 님만의 장도를 제제 되네 첨고를 안데 탁과 되네게 그룹파 줘야 돼 되네 세 되네 시를 뒤쪽으로 뒤고 냠뇨 직고 제단의 차상의 신원장 콜 신원장 콜이야 시고 말면 첨미알바 타르츠 시고 말 콜이야 뽑어요 어다가 첨기 니디디시들 코 뽑어요 거랑 이 첨고자 세상은 저 로봇 미지나 결혼하시는 알아야 탐중해 주 아니면 탐중해 봐 첨고스면 따달리게서 두시는 거 직고 뽑어요 거라다 뽑을리기래 마 첨구래 첨배네 맨에 까메 같이 맨에 살 따다 밥두고 거라 그래서 그 첨다다 디 타고 줘야 다 세상 롭종 여러 장도를 제제고 냠뇨 그 유의를 차지 그 내가데 따다 하고 거라 하고 완전 콜야 아니지게 마 첨배네 마사 시그 말에 탑시들이 디제고를 찾아하고 하면서 그 시나요 말에 아니 마 첨미알에 시나요 말에 드는 거 첨미알 어디에 첨고서 뽑아요로 책으로 그래서 그 탑람도 하고 돼요. 다 탑람 하 먹어야 될 첨미알에 시나요래 아니 뽑아요 말에 배다 그시 첨배나 된마 직강아 슈체 책으로 디나시 마주 땡진 제와 중화도 동반이기 니서 체명에바 니겐 디길라 랑기 장주심 고미야다 신유든 주비야라 닝도당 뽑아 아니 시우주에 되게 판도 죽투의 책으로 봐 나중에 땡땡의 남자도 동반이 되니서 하 먹어야 되길이야 롭종 기내명인데라 나중에 신유든 주에 깔래하고 어당이 연구 말에 지투 말에 제 가와 연구에서 강아 쉬워서 배게는 가서 뽑아야매 아니 지 제다야 롭종 제다야 마신 디네 강아 제다 세상 이게 책으로 어디 나시 롭종 남나 첨딩 롭종 이렇게 미디다 동반이다 장주 셈기 니서 가서 동반이다 땡땡이 남자 하고나 롭종 남준마 청관 롭종 이렇게 나 지과 차고 그래 다 동반이 남자다 땡땡이 남자 하 뭐가 나를 들어보시나 다 남준놈 천도 롭종 매게 나 지과를 차대로 뼈로 드네로
The soldiers, they train extensively so that they can become greatly skilled in all the various aspects of their training that they will need to utilize in a time of great danger, and so they can utilize them well when they're under a lot immeasurable pressure and strain. So, for example, part of the training may involve jumping out of airplanes, and once this has been done a number of times, one can imagine the soldier launching themselves from the aeroplane with joy and excitement because they experienced, they've trained well. And this is quite a bit of fun. They may well look forward to the refresher course in parachuting because they have trained well. But the first time, when they're sitting in the classroom, they're hearing all the theory presented, they're including the dangers of what may go wrong, they're going up in the aeroplane, there will be some fear. There will certainly be some bravado, but there will be fear. And they'll jump with some trepidation. And then they'll land, and they'll see, oh, my instructor was correct. It all worked out fine. I followed the instructions precisely, and no problem. I wouldn't mind trying it again. And they do it a few times, and then they too start to jump with joy and excitement. And in fact, one can imagine that the very first time when they are loading up into the aeroplane, going to jump for their first jump, and they're a bit nervous, if they see experienced parachutists with them, they will take some confidence. And when they're up there, a few thousand feet in the sky, if those experienced parachutists encourage them, say, don't worry, we've done it, you set up just fine, and they set an example and they jump first, you'd feel that little bit more confident too. And you'll follow their example, and you'll land, you'll thank them, and you'll have that joy and now confidence. So similarly with ourselves, we are still in the classroom, learning about how to parachute, learning about all the theory, but we don't need to get up in an aeroplane, we just need to sit and think about what's being presented here again and again and again. We need to take our intellectual understanding of dependence arising and emptiness of inherent existence, and through engaging in the same meditation again and again, we'll start to see that it does make some sense, and then we can start to apply it in meditation to actual experiences we've had, and see that it makes sense, and start to thereafter apply it in our daily life. In this way we start to gain experience. We start to see that there's no need to follow every thought that arises in our mind, believing that things to exist in the way they appear. When we know intellectually now that that is not the case. And we'll start to experience that our afflictions as not being real. And the objects we desire or averse to, not existing in the way that they appear. And the self too, that has such craving needs, it too doesn't exist in the way that it appears. So we'll be able to transform from the classroom student to the parachutist to being an instructor ourselves, through applying ourselves repeatedly over a sustained period, hearing and reflecting on the teachings.
그래서 차당 체질이 봐 다제다 양지 제바 제타디 지슈야레 대자 당 저기다 대시 가사나 니마 다다 풍보다 셈나 때네 제바 제타 시반자다 다데서 고야라야 안둠데 제그레 저다로 지바지바레.
Now let's turn to the text, and we come to a new section looking at parts and part possessor, or the possessor of parts. Because we've already looked at the self, and thereafter the body, and then mind, this will be easy to understand, because the process is identical.
다 대신도 사 치제 조스다고 로라 차르체스 조스 랑첸밤 랑원식 로라 차르모스 저기 봐 조스가 조스를 봐 다야도 갑라 아니 도시오래다 다야도 갑라 조스 봐 로라 간데 책도 다야도 로라야 조스데 랑원 신 마되봐 랑와시도 신 라마되봐 코랑원이 주도 랑마 랑첸바세 어디니지로 책요래서 다 대시 맞아 가사다 풍보다 셈세다 몰로라야 차단 다리 랑와와 신 라마되봐 책요래서 니나신 지바르다 조스를 받다베네 조스데 롤 바간데 책도 셈비게 심주체도 조스데 롤 차도 마이 간라에 마되봐 코 랑게 차시에 간라에 마 랑와 랑첸바시 롤라야 책요래제.
Similarly, when an external object, such as a table, appears to the mind, an independent table, that is, a table established as such by its own particular characteristics, appears. What's being said in this sentence really is nothing new. Now, the only new thing is the object is a table. But if you were to substitute table for person, form aggregate, or mind, the sentence would work exactly the same, because all objects appear to us in this way. So here, it's just a new object, but the process is the same. And the second sentence. In general, the table having been designated as the basis of its qualities, those properties such as shape, color, material, and size can be examined, and its value, quality, and so forth can be discussed.
대시 제바 제단 제바 마제반도 지당의 셰바이나 아니 조스델이야 키시 아니 카도요레 이비요레 코론 유요레 아니 체중 되네시 망고요 봐 되네 인자당 아주 지단도 시도 근데 아다 조세데 야고도 세데 근데 지난 조세 야고도 돼 야직 디全都 도와야 야고민도 세야다 단 체차샤세다 충차샤세다 안에 디체 딱다래 샤세다 나 조세 체 딱다래도 이나디 도와야 인주민도 세야 되네게 셰 여러와 여래서 되네게 다 디조세기 ben에 체중으로 세다 안 조세 카도아 세다 내 조세 규디 신이나 규신이하고도 세다 아직 규디 대이나 아직 자라자다 되네 가린다 야고도 이디 야고민도 규야고요 말해서 되네게 체중을 딱다래샤 체중 중라샤세나 안지다 공세지도 어디 공충아래샤 공체래샤세 누스네는 그 지당아서 마다 마지베스나 안 두스체는 지당 쪽세들이야 두스체는 아주 야와체다 공세자다 카도다 입다 두스체는 차상 코란젤에 유디가 차고래제래
So we aren't investigating, we just observe a table, then that table, together with all its qualities, so the table would here be the basis, together with all its qualities, would appear and we would accept them. So there's a table and we would comment, perhaps if we're in a shop and we're looking to buy a table, so we're having a close look, we'll discuss, oh, there's a table, I like the color, but perhaps not the size, it's a little bit too big, but the one over there, that's a good size and a good color. And then we go and have a closer look and we look at the price and we can determine whether, because of the material and the size and other qualities, whether it is a good price or not. So this is generally how we engage in the world, and if we don't investigate, then the basis and its qualities, then they appear like this, and we can interact with them.
쪽시지 레야 카도 밀레 세와다고 산 쪽서 야고도데 천도데 야고민도 세다 나야 카도 레니 지시시 쪽시지 유징선데 지상 카도 요 야고도 민도 세베 지세시 쪽서 그러지 요래 지단에 요래서 니나시 계주에 대남 강인 이 강인규 계시 시야 유메 세지다 다 쪽적이 계시했을 때 계시되기 지세기 계시디 개발이시 쪽적이 요래서 그러다 지단의 쪽적이 요래 쪽적 매나 지단 쪽적의 매나 쪽적이 전부도 충충도 라요 말아 쪽적의 카던 야고도 민도 라요 말아 지단 쪽적이 규디 야고도 모두 라요 말아 지단 되네인자 지단 계시 쪽적이 요래서 지단 되네인자 쪽적이 카도아세다 쪽적 체중세다 두스지다 시제가 자유고 쪽서도 요래서 그래.
The text continues. For example, when one says this table is excellent, but its color is not good, there is a table that is the base of the estimation of the quality of its color, whilst the base of qualities that possesses these characteristics does exist. If the parts and the whole are divided and analyzed, the attributes and parts individually are not themselves the base of the qualities. So the first sentence is quite clear. With the example, the table is excellent, but its color is not good. There is a table that is the base of the estimation of the quality of its color. So there's first the basis, upon which there are a variety of qualities. So just some synonyms for whatever one prefers, qualities, characteristics, attributes, or properties. So the basis, the table, comes together with these qualities, characteristics, attributes, or properties. Thereafter, the second sentence, whilst the base of qualities that possess these characteristics does exist, so there is a table, if the parts and the whole are divided and analyzed, the attributes and parts individually are not themselves the base of the qualities. What this then means, if there is no table, we cannot refer to a large table. We can't refer to the characteristics or the qualities of a table if there is no table. So we can't talk about a basis of qualities. So we can't talk about qualities without referring to the basis of qualities. So a quality would be, say, the size, and the basis of quality would be the table. So we cannot talk about the size of the table, the quality, if there's no basis of those qualities, the table itself. So there's this relationship between the characteristics and the basis of the characteristics.
지단 두스네 쪽스디 쪽스 코로 요래 지단 쪽스미야 쪽스 요돼 바래지 다 쪽스도 요바이나 다 요당 간에도 써야지 쪽스 요나 요당 간에도 쓰되 당한저 쪽스도 요로 와서 요반서 당한 한주 열로야 나와 간에서 난도랍나 대지 쪽스 나도 가라야 마도와 코롱 랑원이 주바 난고 레제르와다 지단다 쪽스디 난 열로야 나도 가라야 마도 랑원이 주바 난고도 지단 나와 나신다 무인이 솔레 되는시레베 말에 세대 제바치야 두심지시에 책으로 와 다시 외탕 간디시도 무인이 솔라 쪽스데 간디시도 네 나야라 간디시 난고도 세베게다 낭다데다 무인이 솔라 네네스 튠미튠 튠기도에 튠기미도 나다데다 무인이 솔라 튠기도에 튠기미도 세대 다심지시야 되래
Let's look at this then in the way that we're very familiar with. We'd say in general, the table does exist. But the question then is, how does it exist in reality? The starting point, and you've heard this all before, is how does the objects appear to mind? It appears as if it is independent. So the table, like the self, like the body, like mind itself, appears to the mind as being independent, existing by way of its own essence, its own self-existence, and not requiring anything at all. But does it exist in that way? That's the way it appears, but is that how it exists in reality? And thereafter one needs to investigate, to see if the way the object, in this case the table, appears is how it exists in reality.
다도 신에 제바치도 갑라 당아서 대시 셰바다 지바랑 아주 강사이네 낭탕아디시다 아무이니 술레간스도 제바시야레 대시 풍보를 셰디 풍보디 로를 낭술 간스 낭기도 낭수데다 무이니 수이데 퉁기도 퉁기면데 제바지야다 셈세다 낭술을 간스 낭기도 무이니 술레간스도 세 심주지야다 안디나 신다 쪽스세야 쪽스세 요레스 이네다 아주 로를 낭도 간스 낭기도 나와나시 우인이 술라간스도 세 심주치야데 제여도 다 쪽스를 봐 심주치도 우인이 술라야 쪽스를 가 심주치도 갈라 디셔다 쪽스게 차당한 차전해야 돼. 차당 차전 제네 쳔네 제 시도와 제나 시도 지사다 쪽스디 낭수도 간스 낭두라나 강라야 마도 코롱위니 죽되 난거레세 낭타디 낭두세 딘낭타디 당봉한 술을 농회생 받지 하고 와셔. 다 되네마 지단 다 쪽스디 간스두스디 쪽스리아 쪽스 코론 쪽스지 차전이지. 될이야 차시 다변에 변에 지 쪽스기 빵레 세다 두오게 강바세디바 안지 망고시어 차시 되네도 세 차시지. 네네 안디나 네지 천도 도와다 되네기 봐지 계시 망고여 계시디기 지도 차단 차전도 체네 제나 계주당 최시에 남 레레네 계시디 민바당 세요. 차당 차진도 제네 제도 체네 제나 두 제네 차디리에 쪽스게 디 쪽스게 차진 차시리에 디 차시 디 강바레 디 방레레 안디치에서 아니 계주 디 쪽스게 최충의 체디 디리에 아니 가도와 디리에 세 두세 심주시 제제여도 되네 쪽스게 차시디기 차사 아니 디 수르디기 디 수르디야 쪽스 말에 다디 자 쪽스 말에 쪽스 오게 될마 이신 지강바디야 쪽스 레기 쪽스 책임도 아니 두 전에 심주지데 되네 쪽스게 가도디야 그런 쪽스 레면도 제가 되네 인자 쪽스도 지디 조직이 차시 레레다 키슈 레레네 쪽스 차교 말 쪽스 말 레교 말해지래 쪽스 마인스 차시에 남 레레네 계시데 민세도 계시도 쪽스로 봐 쪽스데 말해서
Reading the same sentence again. Whilst the base of qualities that possess these characteristics does exist, So the base of the qualities in this illustration is the table. If the parts in the whole are divided and analyzed, their attributes and parts individually are not themselves the base of the qualities. What this means is, we're doing an investigation to see if the table exists in the way that it appears to the mind. This is the same as the investigations we've done prior with relation to the person or the aggregates or mind, the form aggregate or mind. First, we see how the table appears to mind, which is as if it is independent, and then we investigate to see if its way of appearing and its way of abiding, in other words, the way that it exists in reality, whether they are in accordance or discordance. And the way this investigation is being done is to analyze the part possessor or the basis and its parts. So the part possessor is the basis, that is the table, which appears to mind as independent. But it has many parts. So if we think to ourselves, we analyze this table and say, so which of its parts is the actual table? Because is there a particular part that we can find and say, that is the table itself? Because the table appears to us as independent, not requiring parts. But we can readily see that this table has parts. It has a tabletop, it has legs, and so therefore it has parts. And when we look, we can't say there is a single part that is the table, because a table leg on its own is not the table, it's a table leg. The tabletop on its own is not the table, it's a tabletop, it's a part. So then we see that none of the parts are the table. But what about the attributes or the characteristics, the properties of the table? Are any of those the table itself? Is the color the table? Is the size the table? And of course we recognize that these are just characteristics of the table. They are dependent on the table. They are not the table. So here, when one investigates the basis of qualities, one does so through investigating the basis, the table, through its various qualities of parts and attributes, to see if any of them are the table. And we see that none of them are. No independent table can be found.
두 선의 쪽세디 간주 바 직대 바 차셰디 파파바 세네 세벤 차셰 코론스 리리네 쪽스 책이요 말에 단 매반자 차셰디 파 세벤네 디네 쪽스디 니야라기 말에라래 베니델 마디도와 대다서라 대다 사이위기 가사 차셰 남 리리네 키지민 대다 삼 설위기 제 키시 식니유메 키시 식니유메 지나 계시지 니유하메 시드라 지나 나가 쪽스들이 쪽스레사디 베네디존나 디 쪽스에 강바레스는 다디 강바레 디 쪽스 말에 세치데 강바레 추신직파 고는 유 된 다데 지위에 강바시요와 시레레는 파 유네 다디 방레죠 디야 방레 디 쪽스도 말 파유바네 차시디기 파 세지 유샤베네 가셔서 동바차송라 쪽스 매바 차송로 봐 제가 디네자 조수기 차시레는 파 세네 파 유바네 세바네 조수니야마 동반마 또 조수니야야 말해서 동바레세 동상지마도 요 말세 대다 세위기 제라 아니 차시리 파 사세네 세리 키시 조수디 니야요 말해서 대다 세위지 키시 시니 유메스도 차시디기 파파바 사샤바이나 대시 키시세 조수디 니야요 말해서 동바샤도 요 매바샤로 그래잖아요.
Hopefully this process of investigation is sounding very familiar to you. So we first see how the object appears as independent, and then we seek this independent object. In this case, it's now a table. And we seek it amongst its parts, just like we've done with previous objects. We look at the various parts, and we can't find a single part that is the table itself. So therefore, no part can be said to be the table, because it's simply a part of the table, a part that the table is dependent on. Likewise with the characteristics. Every single characteristic or property or attribute of the table is dependent on the table. It is not the table itself. So amongst the parts and the characteristics or the attributes, no matter how deeply one looks, no table itself can be found. And this is presented in the next sentence. Also, after eliminating the properties and parts, a base of these qualities is not findable. In other words, when investigating the base, the table, through investigating its properties or its qualities and its parts, nowhere in any of its parts or properties is a table found. And therefore the table is empty of being established by way of its own essence. One recognizes it is empty of true existence, empty of inherent existence.
onda kishi de pa chike sewe na se sha na kishi josu ni yu me che da kishi josu ni me ba na ne galde se galde kishi me na se do kishi galde kishi me na kishi de la tembe ki kishi yang yong mo ma re se ora 제사 kishi josu me na dene josu ge kishi de la tembe bi kishi de ge yong yo ma re se 제사 josu ko me na josu ge gang ba na josu ge ka do da se de de yong yo ma ro 제사 그래서 kishi josu de me na de la tembe kishi de ge yong ma re se yong ni yo ma re se
Now coming to the next sentence, maybe read it on your own, but the meaning as it starts out is if there is no table, there can be no characteristics of a table. Likewise, there cannot be characteristics of a table without a table. So neither can exist without the other.
다 kishi la tene kishi joko ba yimbe kishi namja me bar mi giru se de da nganzu du ji simju je de da jokse de nganzu du je de jokse ge chashi pa chasang se ne ane jokse ge chashi re ne jokse rebe se ne simju na jokse ge chashi re ne jokse ma re ko jokse re mi do da di jokse re mi do pa chashi de pa se yo du jokse de me ba dong sa de cha ru gu do dine 인자다 쪽스데 가네스 라우두스는 쪽스디 데니게 차시에 막고 저 초베게 초데 데니게 초바지라 파 쪽스디 코로 차시에 막고지라 떼네 주고도 띵기도 제사다 차시에 막고지라 땡바레샤스 제사 차시에 막고지라 땡바인자 차시에라 떼네 키취 코롱의 키취 아니 강바다디 바이 막고지라 파 떼네 여바지 Dela dine yobadela, and delia and jokes pa lu dapa, chashi mangbuji, jela dine and lupa dapa chilisha, dabachi. Jezan jokes said, we need to like any do said, Koran chashi mangbuji pa, dinje, yobachimato, the yobaresha, Sabegida, the nigi din, chashi mangbuji, din, delpa lupa jokes, pa lu daji, dinish yobaresha, Sabege, how go you do, jokes di. 차시 샹라 뛰는 주바데 하고 그러고 지난다 조스 차시 전에 뛰는 주바 인장 아니 조스 될래 땡비기 계셔야 망보여 돼 예디 봐 차고를 지난 조스 될래 땡비 계셔 요래 조스디 차시 돼서래 뛰네 다바 인장 차시 될래 땡바 인장 조스디 나올래야 계셔 망보여 돼 차고를 지난 되는 인장 또 심주 지디 만서 조스디 그런 차시 망부지를 전부 될래对吧的对呢主把去通过了对呢主把不对呢略把下把对呢是越把好过对呢好过的这些落来那就干的那个是呢刚来呀嘛对吧可能我呢主对能过了加上都是呢就是定位呢出了拆卸了对呢主对跟把对呢略把大把了对把去拆了对어디 낭수 대시 강래 맞대봐 그런 거는 유대바 낭수디다 노출레샤 때 나와나시 민두 선배 선배도 쪽서 라신 맞대봐 때 나와나시 민두 선배 내가 니어도 쪽서기 쪽서 라신 맞대봐 또 말해서 디네 인자다 디 나와나시 민두 선 내가 니바 인자 대신 나와나시 쪽서 강라마 랑문이 주바 나와나신 다가라레서 별로디 된 리버 총주고 된전 루바데 고매와 차루고 루바 제사디 제사 쪽지디 캐셔를 땜바 통용어도 되네 쪽지 될라 땜비 캐셔디야 망보여보 여버 차고 와서 됐어.
So this final sentence, I'll read it now, and then explain it to hopefully make it a bit clearer. Wait, I'm in the wrong place. There is no such base, then since characteristics, let me just see where, there is no such base, then if there is no such base, then since characteristics are necessarily established in dependence on a base of qualities, and moreover, since a base of qualities is necessarily established in dependence on attributes, the attributes also will not exist. So what is being said in this final sentence is there's a relationship of mutual dependency between the basis of characteristics and the characteristics itself. That for the one, there to be the one, it depends on there being the other. It is not the one without the other. To have the characteristics, one needs the basis of the characteristics. Having the basis of characteristics, there will be characteristics. So there's a mutual dependency between the two. So what this means is that the table, it appears to consciousness as being independent. But when one investigates seeking an independent table, the only place one can look is within the table's parts and within the table's characteristics. And nowhere within those parts and characteristics can an independent table be found, because manifestly the table is dependent on its parts and on its characteristics. And not only is a table therefore not independent but dependent on parts, it is also dependent on imputation by mind onto the aggregation of those parts. So the second way the table is also dependent is by being labeled or imputed by mind onto the aggregation of its parts. So therefore, in reality, the table does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing the way that it appears. It's empty of true existence. It exists, though, merely as a dependence arising, dependence on its parts and imputation.
당 저기 나시 강사당 풍보당 샘당 적세세당 저기 다 적세세도 다 먼저 배선샤도 다 먼저 치료기 신당 추당 매도당 안에지게 롱당 차산 집을 와다도 생각도 로래 낭수 따여도 낭수대 간에 낭도스 낭수대다 모인니스도 퉁기민도스 제 퉁기도 제바치도 지산 낭수디 안내가 저 강라마 되바 가래 나वे나 강라마 랑문이 좀 나와지 난고요 바지 디 낭수대다 방위인스 간에 수지에도 간에시나 차산 셴래 되는 줍죠 맞아 셴래 맞죠 봐 주야 매버래 추이네 그런 셴치를 되는 여바 최고래 매다 룽당 안에 지신라서 받아 간에시네 샘체나 샘자마 간에시나고 셴치를 되는 연구요 바데 되는 줍죠 지산다 나서래 가래이나 나서 낭수대다 모인이 순이디 미팅 받아 차도요 지산 모인이 수리 샹라 되는 주바래 샹라 되는 주바 인상 당가서래 낭수 강라마도 랑문이 주바디기 동바래 지산다 최 간에시네 나서 랑문이 주바디기 동바디 더 동반이 있어야 돼. 지사 최 탐제대로 동반이 돼. 고미야 제바제야다. 동반이 또 여바래 있어야 돼. 지사 최 간에지 있네야. 낭수디 강라마 랑원이 주바 나와 디기 나와 나신지 매바래다. 동바래. 지사디 동반이 있어. 왜니 솔라 간에지네 현실을 되네. 발뢰 다바쯤 여바래 마도 생각해요. 말해지. 어두스네다. 간저기 디레다 된다라.
Hopefully then what's clear here, when one is investigating a table, is that the process is identical to what we've been looking at for some time. Whether the object is the person, the self, Or if it's, as we looked at last night, the form aggregate, the body, or as we looked at this morning, a mind or consciousness, or as we're looking at now, an external form such as a table or the trees outside or the wind, whatever it may be, we should take the same approach. In our meditation, look at a variety of objects like I've just presented and ask oneself first, how does it appear? And not just to repeat, it appears as independent, but to really see how it appears as being independent. And then investigate to see if it exists in the way that it appears. So every step here stays the same. You first select your object, see how it appears. When it's vividly clear to you that it appears to exist by way of its own nature, seek out that nature. See if it does exist by way of its own nature, which is how it appears. Then one comes to the recognition that the phenomenon, again, whether it's the person, the body, the mind, or an external object, whatever it may be, it does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. And emptiness is realized. And one realizes here that appearance and reality are discordant. The way every object of thought appears is not how it exists in reality. And having realized emptiness, then one reminds ourselves the object does not exist in the way that it appears, but it does exist as a mere dependence arising, dependence on causes, parts, or imputation by mind. And this is the case for any object of thought, whether the person, the body, the mind, or an external form such as a table. The process of meditation is identical.
Kalal masona kala shimbu du seda shimbu midu seda ane kopi roshina kopi tiki shimbu du se shimbu midu se che choro wadang zo jisa kopi shimbu du seda shimbu midu se ni di kopi shimbu se di nga zo samda de korong mone juba roshina ngor wa jisa da ko na wa na je korong shimbu se di kala ya ma de bo korong mone shimbu chi yorbe스네 shimju chena di yuayo marwada. Pene tatu ushine nga zo samda kobi shimbure sayade, shimbare sayade. Gane shego warasana nga zo chik kobi ji tungne, zhoho ji, zhoho kobi ki zhoho, kobi koran rango nguwene shimbure, kangla ma dioba koran nguwene shimbu shi yobayi na chowa ganis kiewe ne ko shimbure haja yamada shimbu mare layo marwa. Chisa dine yasa kobi sayade, nga zo shimbure sayade, 제시기 소수기 뚱제 조지 뇨드 델야 조지 초와델야 조뇨위기 초와델야 소수기 대간라라시 기회 기기여바나 안에 디기 고비기 조델야 어디디 신부두선 데네기 간라라 기위기 юм센 델라 때네 나 저기 신부두 세바 안에 저기 바 신부세 털려 봤다고 봐. 단 신부 민도 라칸디기 가서는 코로나 동에도 초와시기에도 초와들이야 뜻 가고 말해. 그저 미디어바를 시키거라. 미디어바를 끼어 봐자 어디 신부 민도 세다고. 제자고 신부세디 찍라 뎀 데기비 초와지기 델 조디 뇨비기 초와지기 초와들라 소수기 되바 소수기다 지기 델라 초와들이야 직 되바를 끼어나 되네 디 거부디 콜레 신부스는 따고로 따고래 안에 가서 초와들이야 조화중요 초와들이야 뜻 미디어 바로 끼වෙ네 신부 민두 센터 받다고 지상고 고비 심다 미신세다 칼라 심다 마심세다 고좀 아주기 초와치기 초와들어서 맞으나 디 신부 민두 되바나 신부도 세다 발뢰 받다샤 바레마도 코롱 칼라 코롱 외네 나주 초와라 맞덴바 코롱 외네 신부를 써야지 신부에서 주요 말다가 매발에 그런 거에는 신부세 주요 말 신부 멤버세 주요 말와 세상 디 신두 민도 써야 파뢰 파다도 초와를 지르지 때 초와디게 조주용 내가 때네 안에 초와디래 조주용 위기 소수게 Deva chuna chimbodu, Deva majuna, Shimbu midu stava chagdua. Then was the Shimjura somewhere at Tawena.
For this knowledge and one's insight in meditation to have a radical transformative effect, it's imperative that you integrate this way of thinking that is in accordance with reality, with every thought, in every interaction. So for example, if you're feeling a little bit dopey and you need a bit of energy, you go to a coffee shop and you order a coffee. You take it, you drink it, and you're very pleased. It's delicious. Here too, the taste of it being delicious, it appears to consciousness. It is an object of consciousness, and like all our objects of consciousness, it appears as if being inherently existent. So this deliciousness appears to be inherently existent. So one should investigate. Can I find an inherently existent, delicious taste at all? One will not be able to find it. Rather, what one finds is that the deliciousness of this coffee comes about in dependence on causes. Primarily, first, a preceding consciousness of feeling. Consciousness, feelings divided into happy, unhappy, and neutral. Here, a feeling of happiness, or we can maybe say of joy or delight, but it's a feeling arises in relation to the taste, and independent on that, we label the taste of the coffee as delicious. Should, on the other hand, that's served as the coffee. So if the coffee, though, wasn't to our liking, it perhaps was too hot or not hot enough, or a little bit bitter, or too much sugar, not being to our liking, an unpleasant feeling arises in relation to the taste, and we label the coffee not as delicious, perhaps as disappointing, and we maybe send it back. So what we see here is even something like the pleasure we take in a meal or a drink. It's a dependence arising. But that's not how it appears to us. It appears to us as if by its own nature, the deliciousness, this quality of deliciousness is attributed to, or the coffee possesses this aspect of deliciousness. But when we investigate, we see that is not how it exists in reality.
Isa da michigi kopi tong do delia chowa kanya manyong ba che chowa jingang zugi jiang chamba da de ne genji ne jige tong do zhuo kanya chowa manyong ya che yong du wa de ne de le xibu de la ne ga shi de de ga zhuo yong gun de yong ma song zi ga na hago ma song la ge ruwa de jisa jigi zhuo jing ne xibu du la jigi zhuo de yong ne xibu mi du la ge ji de gi da hago ma song la ge 수디 덴바레다. 지사 수디 덴바레. 지사 디네자 소소기 조디 녀기 찍델라 때네 신부 민들라겐데 결혼도 주말에 라요 말에 신부들라데 결혼도 주말에 라요 말와. 지사 차상도 초월에 지대 신부도다 미두세디 신부세디 초월에 뛰어봐지. 초월에 뛰어시. 초월질에 때네 안 파다봐 신부세 파다봐 자기도 신부 매바세다 지 초월에 지 뛰어지 파 신부세 파다봐지마도 지사 초월라 마되봐 아니 뢰파 디 신부다 신부에서 마다봐 있나 진짜 파셔들래 디 코롱 원에 줍디게 신부다 신부에서 주야지 민도하다 매반자다 신부다 신부 민도세디 초월질에 뛰어 될봐 뢰파 신부다 되네 초월질 뛰네 될라 뢰 신부 민도스다이도 지사 신부의 심다 마심세디 신 초월질에 뛰어 안 될라 뢰파 딱발라 뛰어봐지 뛰네 줍디봐지 마도 되네 마되비기다 신부다 신부 매바세다 가야 니에메데 차도와.
If there are 3 people and 2 of them are sharing a dish and the third isn't eating it, and perhaps has never eaten this before, the one person says, "Oh, this is delicious." The other says, "Oh, this is awful." And the third person has no idea. They've never eaten this. Between these three, who is correct? Is this a delicious dish? Is it an awful dish? Or is it something that's worthy of being indifferent towards? Who is correct there? When we think about this in relation to dependency, we realize that these individual experiences come about in dependence on a number of causes, and those therefore lead to the final determination of whether the label delicious will be imputed onto the dish, or the label disappointing is imputed on the dish, or indifference. We see there that our experience does not exist in the way that it appears. It's come about in dependence on a number of causes, in particular in this illustration, a feeling of either a pleasant or an unpleasant feeling in relation to the object, and thereafter, in dependence on that feeling, mind labels delicious or not delicious. And this then indicates that the object, this deliciousness of the meal, is a dependent arising, and therefore it cannot exist by way of its own nature. It has to be empty. Just like every other object of thought, it appears in a particular way, but does not exist in this way.
And then those generally those in Shimjura Chebache, the Jedi Jugeta, Kasan Kasa Seadan, Da Seadan, Pumbo Seadan, Sem Seadan, Da Jugi, Jokes Seadan, those in the Susulia, Lona Nangsudi, Da Nangsudi, Da Nisudi Kanish Chagdus with Shimju Cheda, Jeda, Dangan to Che Karishina, Nanto Janzugi, Judusine, Shimju Chedike. Nangsudi da Nisudi Tungu Dungumido Sejabaja Daddy, Manzuki Shianchila do Shimju Chedu, Shianchila Dun Juba Hagu, she said in Zang that Tengubi, down the Tawa Delia, Chik and Richina, Shianchila Dun Juba Mato, Shianchila Mato was out in your mares. Shianchila Dune, Paul Louis Shabatsam Yobares, Paul Louis Shaba, Shianchila Dune, Paul Louis. 大把这么有吧的，什么都现起来对呢，略大把买一把，但看要嘛的说，他今天接把钱呢，现起来对呢，略大把买一把，就年要的甚至呢，接把钱呢，看年要嘛的是。
Every object, whether the person, the body, the physical aggregate, or the mental aggregates, the mind, or an external object of form such as the table, any object of thought is suitable for us to investigate. We've heard now that the process of investigation remains unchanged. So therefore, by investigating a wide range of objects, we deepen our understanding that with firstly, how phenomena appear to us, and secondly, we deepen our familiarity with the process of investigation, which is where we seek out how the phenomenon exists. And then thirdly, it deepens our familiarity with the understanding that no phenomenon exists truly. So the view of the Prasangika is that no phenomenon exists inherently. Rather, all phenomena are dependent arisings. There is not a single phenomenon that is not dependent. In particular, amongst the different kinds of dependency, every phenomenon is dependent on imputation by mind.
Geshe Thubten Rabten Rabten Bendigo Dusen Jeba Chetan Nisudi Su Teba Tune Yane Tune, that Dundadi Sosugi Duchine, Samnata Jeba Chidu, Dundadi Modi, Moinis the Hako Yungues. She's not the Hako Taiva Jella, 안 Dalai mi pe zeju neje gom ye shine gom ja wore saji ndu shine sungorwa di inzanda dene nje jarum che kiti ina sunga dilia andi ko lobjong che wore peje le lobjong che pa thwe don ta ya ne ya na sam dang gu re saji pe jarum che dadi galop nale nembu shu sungor ketne lobjong che wore se lobjong che ba che samda dine ko ngui ni ha gu re 제가 대바 지부기 아니 말아 대바 지부 제바기 아니 저기 디기 주비하다 동아세 두고 말아 제가 대바 지부 제제 대바 산지 교그리에서 대바 제시로 이 대바 지부기 롭정 맞네 대바 지부기 맞아 동아세 투야다 디기 주비다 산예야 대바 지부 제 대바 디기 제 동아세 투야다 디기 주투마 제가 대 롭정 제고 제바 제고라 제가 디니기 제바 제고 추 제가 낭비에 따르기디 지게 추 개멜에네 제바 제 심주진의 우인이 수 신발라 하고 판도요 그래서 우인이 수디 신발이나 디네 교쇼 말했어 너주 쇼고 말 너주 마셔나 강한 책마 강한에 세투 그래야지 제가 여름식이네 바 심주제 제바제 삼는다 디제 마치 계침불에서 염적이 디나디 송고래 지상한 저기 낭비게 chuyển 퇴섬 곰숨세디 기디나디 당보 퇴바제다 데니스 된데 양내 양도 삼당고래 대삼당 우인에서 하고요 되네 곰자고래 세지 되송고래 지상 디네자다 디키싱한 저 제바제다 된마 자음치 송샤바들이야 당하랑 조당 마당 하나도 차상 찍버리 당하랑 차상이 두치네 야네 양도 디치 두치네 심주제 제바제 삼당고에 계침부 차고와 데네기 삼당에는 난 길이 지나가는 소리야 니수디게 됐을 하고야리야 지 하고리라라라 준 내모에 수디 하고 두야기 on고 합지 라거와 데네 사당은 데링기 단니수디 대샤샤나 안 모티네 아직 버셔지마 다 가서 청월이야 빼셔지 안 제바제랑 두스네 안 주야래샤
It's of great importance that one continues to do as you have been doing by attending this course, of hearing teachings on this and all the topics of the Dharma again and again. It's through hearing teachings and reading Dharma books that one gathers knowledge, and knowledge is the basis for reflection. The broader one's knowledge, the deeper one's reflection can be. Without extensive knowledge, it's difficult to have deep, penetrative reflections. And independence on extensive hearing and reflection, the two done together, eventually we'll be ready to engage in meditation on the object, on the topic that we have been reflecting and studying on. And here meditation means meditating on that object of meditation with the union of calm abiding and meditative insight. So in order to hold the object of meditation, or the topic that one has been studying, with single points of concentration and meditative insight, this comes about in dependence on prior extensive hearing and reflecting, coming to know the object, or the topic rather, extremely well. And because of this, His Holiness, in every talk, encourages those who hear his teachings to put effort into their education, to never stop developing their education. And in the context of us as Buddhists, he repeatedly makes the point that no matter how heartfelt one's faith, no matter how strong one's aspiration, that alone won't lead to the elimination of suffering and the attainment of happiness. One has to continually gather education or gather knowledge through hearing and reflect on the meaning. Integrate then that knowledge into one's way of thinking through gaining experience of the knowledge. And whether one is a Buddhist or not, coming to understand this topic is of such benefit. Because as one, to the extent that one comes to understand reality, understand that no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears, that everything we think about doesn't quite exist in the way that it appears to us, we will start to be less deceived by appearances. And we'll start to act more in accordance with reality. To bring that about, though, takes repeated hearing and reflecting over a sustained period. And to do so skillfully involves meditating, as we've heard over the course of this weekend, on a variety of objects. Because we've heard that whatever the object is, whether the self, the body, the mind, or an external phenomenon, the process of meditation is identical, coming to see the way it appears, and then investigating to see if it exists in this way or not, realizing that it's empty of inherent existence, but it exists merely as a dependent arising. You do this on a wide variety of objects, it will deepen one's experience of what one is learning, coming to see that the object, its apprehending consciousness, and the person themselves are all empty of inherent existence. So our time is up. We'll conclude here for this weekend. Thank you very much. The next weekend, we'll start at the top of page 13, looking at the illustration with regard to Amala. So thank you very much.